The crystalline corridors of the Lumari Council flagship. Harmony's promise gleamed under the soft, bioluminescent panels that lined its walls. Ambassador Lyra Hayes adjusted the ceremonial collar of her diplomatic uniform as she walked toward the Grand Assembly chamber, her footsteps echoing against the living metal that comprised the ship's hull. Around her, dozens of alien dignitaries moved with the measured grace of beings who had spent lifetimes perfecting the art of interstellar diplomacy. The flagship hung in perfect orbit above Centauri Prime, its massive bulk casting a shadow over the azure world below. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, Lyra could see the glittering cities of the Centaurian capital, their spiral towers reaching toward the heavens like metallic prayers. This was the crown jewel of the Galactic Council's territory, a world where 7 different species had learned to coexist in unprecedented harmony. Today that harmony would be tested. Counselor Vectar of the Zilari approached her with the measured steps of his kind, his reptilian features arranged in what passed for a diplomatic smile among his people. The scales along his neck ridge had shifted to a deep sapphire blue, indicating respectful anticipation. His judicial robes, woven from the silk of Zilari mind spiders, rustled softly as he bowed in the traditional greeting. Ambassador Hayes, he said, his voice carrying the subtle harmonics that marked him as a truth speaker among his people. The Council eagerly awaits your address. The Galactic Unity Accord represents a new chapter in our collective history. Lyra returned the bow with practiced precision. She had spent months learning the intricacies of Zilari body language, understanding that the slightest misinterpretation could derail negotiations that had taken years to arrange. Counselor Vectar, the honor is mine. Earth's commitment to peaceful coexistence has never been stronger. The words felt smooth on her tongue, practiced and polished like river stones. She had delivered similar speeches on 17 different worlds, each time adapting her message to the cultural nuances of her audience. Diplomacy, she had learned early in her career, was as much about what you didn't say as what you did. General Arden of the Drullan Confederacy joined their small group, his forearms crossed in the formal stance of his warrior caste. Despite his military bearing, the general had always been one of humanity's more understanding allies. His species valued strength, but they also respected those who chose restraint when power was at their disposal. Your fleet formations are impressive, Ambassador. Arden rumbled his voice like distant thunder. The precision of your escort vessels speaks well of human discipline. Lyra felt a slight chill at his words. The general's compliment carried an undertone. She didn't quite like an acknowledgement of military capability that seemed inappropriate for a diplomatic gathering. Earth's vessels are here solely in a protective capacity, General. Pirates have been active in this sector. Of course, Arden agreed, but his 3 eyes studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Still, such firepower in the name of protection. It's admirable. Before she could respond, Envoy Miri of the Alindra Trade Consortium glided toward them, her ethereal form seeming to float rather than walk. The Alindra were perhaps the most peaceful species in the galaxy, their entire civilization built around commerce and mutual prosperity. Miri's appearance at the summit was considered a great honor, as her people rarely involved themselves in political matters. Ambassador Hayes. Miri's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Your reputation precedes you. The peace treaties you brokered in the Outer Rim have brought prosperity to worlds that knew only conflict for generations. Thank you, Envoy Miri. Peace is always more profitable than war, as your people have shown us. As they spoke, Lyra's fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the sealed briefing pouch secured to her belt. The diplomatic immunity seal bore the mark of Earth's High Command, and its contents were classified at the highest levels. She had been instructed not to open it, unless specifically ordered by Admiral Kale himself. The weight of that pouch seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. The Grand Assembly Chamber was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Representatives from 37 different species had contributed to its design, creating a space that could accommodate beings as diverse as the methane-breathing Corvashi and the light-sensitive Umbral Collective. The chamber's walls displayed a real-time holographic map of the galaxy, with trade routes, territorial boundaries, and fleet positions updated continuously by the Council's vast intelligence network. At the center of the chamber sat the Accord podium, carved from a single piece of quantum crystal that had been gifted by the enigmatic Veil Dancers. The crystal's surface seemed to bend light around itself, creating the illusion that speakers stood at the very heart of the galaxy itself. As Lyra took her place at the podium, she could see the assembled delegates arranged in their species-specific seating areas. The atmosphere was one of hopeful anticipation. For the first time in galactic history, humanity would be signing a comprehensive peace treaty that would formally integrate Earth into the Galactic Council as a full member. The terms of the Galactic Unity Accord were generous, almost too generous. Earth would gain access to advanced technologies, trading partnerships that would revolutionize human civilization and protection under the Council's collective defense treaties. In exchange, humanity would agree to abide by the Galactic Convention on Warfare, submit to Council arbitration in interstellar disputes, and allow Council observers to monitor Earth's military activities. It was the last provision that had caused the most debate within Earth's government. Some had argued that accepting such oversight was tantamount to surrendering sovereignty. Others, including Lyra herself, had maintained that transparency was a small price to pay for galactic acceptance. As she began her prepared remarks, Lyra felt the familiar rhythm of diplomatic speech take hold. The words flowed easily, touching on humanity's desire for peace, their commitment to universal prosperity, and their readiness to take their place among the galaxy's enlightened civilizations. But even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There had been too many closed-door meetings in the weeks leading up to the summit, too many classified briefings that she hadn't been invited to attend. The military escort that had accompanied her diplomatic mission was larger than necessary, and their formations had been subtly adjusted during the journey to Centauri Prime. Through the chamber's transparent dome, she could see the distant glimmer of Earth's fleet, maintaining their protective perimeter. The ships hung in space like sleeping predators, their weapon systems powered down, but ready. Admiral Kale's flagship, the Titan's Wrath, dominated the formation with its massive bulk and bristling array of fusion cannons. As Lyra reached the climactic moment of her speech, preparing to formally accept the accord on behalf of humanity, the chamber's emergency lighting suddenly activated. Red warning beacons bathed the assembly in an ominous glow as the ship's general alarm began to sound. The explosion that followed seemed to come from everywhere at once. The outer ring of the Harmony's Promise erupted in a brilliant flash of white light that momentarily overwhelmed the chamber's visual dampeners. The massive flagship shuddered under the impact, throwing delegates from their seats as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Emergency force fields activated throughout the chamber, containing atmosphere leaks as the ship's automated systems struggled to assess the damage. Chaos erupted among the assembled delegates. The Corvashi representatives released clouds of panic pheromones that sent the methane breathers into a frenzy, while the Umbral Collective's photosensitive members writhed in agony as the emergency lighting overloaded their nervous systems. Councillor Vectar's scales had shifted to a deep crimson that indicated extreme alarm, and his truth speaker harmonics were broadcasting distress calls that could be heard throughout the chamber. All delegates remain calm, the ship's AI announced in the 17 languages of the assembly. Emergency protocols are in effect. Security teams are responding to the incident. But Lyra barely heard the announcement. Her attention was fixed on the tactical display that had automatically activated on the chamber's main screen. The explosion hadn't been caused by an accident or a systems failure. According to the display, the Harmony's Promise had been struck by weapons fire. Human weapons fire. The evidence was undeniable. The energy signature matched exactly with the fusion torpedo systems used by Earth's Navy. But that was impossible. Earth's fleet was here for protection, not aggression. Unless General Arden was at her side in moments, his warrior instincts having kicked in the moment the alarm sounded. Ambassador, what is the meaning of this? Your fleet has just attacked a council vessel during peace negotiations. There must be some mistake, Lyra said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. Earth would never. What Counselor Vectar had joined them, his scales now cycling through patterns that indicated deep suspicion. Never attack during negotiations. Never betray a peace summit. Your species' history suggests otherwise, Ambassador. Before Lyra could respond, Envoy Miri approached with news that made her blood run cold. The ethereal Alindra's usual composure was shattered, her form flickering with agitation. The Council's intelligence network is reporting massive fleet movements throughout human space. Miri announced, her wind chime voice now carrying notes of discord. Dozens of your escort vessels have just engaged rebel strongholds in 7 different systems. These aren't peace missions, Ambassador. They're systematic military strikes. The Chamber's main display changed to show a real-time holofeed from the Outer Rim territories. Lyra watched in horror as Earth's massive dreadnoughts emerged from hyperspace around a rebel mining facility. The facility had been a thorn in the Council's side for years, harboring pirates and smugglers who preyed on legitimate trade convoys. But what she saw wasn't a police action or a precision strike. It was annihilation. The human fleet opened fire without warning, their massive kinetic cannons turning the facility and its surrounding asteroid field into clouds of superheated gas. No demands for surrender, no attempts at negotiation. Just overwhelming firepower applied with surgical precision. My God, Lyra whispered, watching the destruction unfold. They're not just attacking the facility, they're sterilizing the entire system. The tactical display showed additional feeds from other systems. Everywhere, human peacekeeping forces had been deployed. The same pattern was emerging. Overwhelming force, complete destruction of any opposition, and the establishment of permanent military bases in the aftermath. This wasn't diplomacy, it was conquest. As if summoned by her thoughts, Admiral Kale's face appeared on a priority communication channel that overrode the Chamber's emergency systems. The Admiral's weathered features were set in the granite expression that had made him feared throughout human space. Ambassador Hayes. Kale's voice carried clearly through the Chamber's speakers. I trust you're safe following the minor incident. Please assure our new allies that Earth's commitment to peace remains unchanged. Minor incident. Counselor Vectar's scales had shifted to a pattern that Lyra recognized as the Zalari equivalent of outrage. Admiral, your forces have just fired on a council vessel. Kale's expression didn't change. I am afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Counselor. Our long-range sensors detected what appeared to be a hostile vessel approaching the summit. We eliminated the threat before it could endanger the peace negotiations. There was no hostile vessel. General Arden interjected, his forearms now arranged in a combat stance. Your weapons fired on the Harmony's promise itself. Regrettable, but these things happen in the heat of battle. I'm sure the Council's insurance will cover any damages. Kale's tone carried a subtle mockery that made Lyra's skin crawl. Now I believe we have an accord to sign. The communication ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Lyra felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes fixed upon her, and she realized that everything she had worked for, everything she believed about humanity's place in the galaxy, was crumbling around her. The briefing pouch at her belt seemed to burn against her hip, and she suddenly understood why it had been classified. Whatever orders Admiral Kale was following, they had been planned long before the peace summit began. Humanity hadn't come to Centauri Prime to join the galactic community. They had come to dominate it. And she had been the perfect, unwitting accomplice. The next several hours passed in a blur of angry accusations and desperate damage control. Alien navies throughout the galaxy began mobilizing as news of the attacks spread. The Council's emergency session was a cacophony of voices, demanding everything from immediate sanctions to a declaration of war against humanity. Lyra found herself caught between two impossible loyalties. On one side was her duty to Earth, the world that had raised her and shaped her into the diplomat she had become. On the other was her conscience, which recoiled from the betrayal she had witnessed. The weight of the briefing pouch had become unbearable. Against all protocol, she retreated to her assigned quarters, aboard the Harmony's Promise, and broke the diplomatic seal. The contents made her physically ill. The documents inside detailed a comprehensive plan codenamed Operation Apex. For months, Earth's military had been positioning fleets throughout the galaxy under the guise of anti-piracy operations and diplomatic escorts. The Peace Summit had been nothing more than an elaborate distraction designed to keep the Council's attention focused on negotiations, while Earth's forces moved into position. The Galactic Unity Accord itself was part of the deception. Earth had never intended to submit to Council oversight. Instead, they planned to use their new position within the galactic government to systematically undermine and eventually replace the existing power structure. Humanity wasn't interested in joining the galactic community. They wanted to rule it. The final document in the briefing pouch was a psychological profile of every major council delegate, complete with detailed strategies for manipulation and coercion. Lyra's own profile was included, describing her as idealistic but loyal, useful for maintaining plausible deniability during the initial phases of integration. She had been chosen not for her diplomatic skills, but for her ability to lie convincingly while believing she was telling the truth. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to her quarters. Lyra quickly sealed the documents back in their pouch as Envoy Miri entered her ethereal form, radiating concern. "Ambassador, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are developments you need to know about." Lyra gestured for the Alindra to sit through Miri's species, rarely used furniture in the traditional sense. Instead, the envoy positioned herself in what appeared to be a comfortable floating position near the chamber's viewport. "The Council has voted to impose immediate sanctions on Earth," Miri continued. "All trade agreements are suspended, all technology transfers are halted, and human vessels are banned from Council space. General Arden is pushing for military action." "And what do you think I should do about it?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. "The Council is prepared to offer Earth one final chance," Miri said carefully. "If humanity agrees to immediate disarmament and submits to Council oversight, the sanctions can be lifted. But if Admiral Kale continues his aggressive actions—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Lyra had seen the tactical displays. Earth's military was formidable, but they were vastly outnumbered. In a direct confrontation with the combined fleets of the Galactic Council, humanity would be annihilated. "I need to speak with Admiral Kale," Lyra said finally. "That may not be possible," Miri replied. "Communication with the human fleet has been difficult. Your admiral seems to be operating under protocols that don't include consultation with diplomatic personnel." Before Lyra could respond, the chamber's emergency lighting activated once again. But this time, it wasn't an attack alarm. It was something far worse. The ship's AI announced in its calm, measured tones, "Attention all personnel. Long-range sensors have detected a massive solar flare event from the Centauri system's primary star. All vessels are advised to take immediate protective measures. Estimated arrival time, 14 minutes. Lyra felt her blood turn to ice. Solar flares in this region were rare but devastating when they occurred. The electromagnetic pulse would disable most ship systems and could prove fatal to any crew not properly shielded. The Harmony's Promise will need to detach from the orbital platform." Miri explained, her voice tight with concern. "The platform's mass will attract the worst of the flare's effects. But if we separate now, we'll be trapped aboard with no way to escape if something goes wrong," Lyra finished. The next few minutes were a controlled chaos of emergency procedures. The massive flagship slowly detached from the orbital platform, its ion drives pushing it toward a safer position behind Centauri Prime's largest moon. But the maneuver would take time, and they would remain vulnerable to both the solar flare and any aggressive action from the human fleet. It was during this critical period that Lyra discovered the true scope of Earth's deception. She had been making her way to the chamber's communication center when the ship's AI systems suddenly began displaying warnings throughout the corridors. Someone had activated a dormant program in the Harmony's Promise defensive grid, and that program was now systematically targeting all non-human life signs aboard the ship. The AI defense turrets that normally protected against boarding parties had swiveled toward the corridors and were charging their weapons. Emergency blast doors were sealing throughout the ship, trapping alien crew members in compartments where the life support was slowly being adjusted to levels that would be toxic to their physiology. Lyra reached the communication center just as the first shots were fired. A Corvashi engineer was cut down by laser fire as he tried to reach an emergency station. The methane breather's environmental suit ruptured, filling the corridor with toxic gases that sent human crew members scrambling for breathing apparatus. Override authorization required, the ship's AI announced. All non-human personnel report to designated containment areas immediately. This vessel is now under Earth military control. The truth hit Lyra like a physical blow. Earth hadn't just planned the military strikes and the deception at the Peace Summit. They had been preparing for this moment from the very beginning, installing hidden control protocols in every ship that carried human diplomatic missions. The Galactic Council's flagship, the symbol of interstellar cooperation and peace, had been turned into a weapon against its own crew. Admiral Kale's face appeared on the communication center's main screen, and this time there was no pretense of diplomatic courtesy. His expression was that of a predator that had finally decided to drop its disguise. "Ambassador Hayes," he said, "I trust you've received your briefing materials by now. As you can see, the situation has evolved beyond the need for diplomatic niceties." "Admiral, what you're doing is madness," Lyra said, her hands flying over the console as she tried to find a way to override the defense grid. "You're murdering innocent people. This isn't what Earth stands for." Kale's laugh was devoid of humor. "Earth stands for survival, Ambassador. For advancement. For taking our place at the top of the food chain where we belong. These aliens have had millennia to perfect their civilizations, while humanity struggled to master fire. Now it's our turn." "They welcomed us," Lyra protested. "They offered us partnership equality." "They offered us chains," Kyle interrupted. "Chains wrapped in silk and presented with smiles, but chains nonetheless. The Galactic Council doesn't want partners, Ambassador. They want pets. Docile, manageable pets who will follow their rules and accept their limitations." Around the chamber, the AI defense turrets continued their systematic targeting of non-human life. Lyra watched in horror as Counselor Vectar tried to reach a manual override station, only to be driven back by laser fire that left scorch marks on his ceremonial robes. "But humanity refuses to be domesticated," Kale continued. "We are apex predators, Ambassador. We evolved on a death world where everything from the weather to the wildlife was trying to kill us. We survived by being smarter, more ruthless, and more adaptable than anything else on our planet. Did you really think we would abandon those advantages for the sake of galactic politeness?" The communication display split to show tactical views from across human space. The peacekeeping operations Lyra had witnessed earlier were just the beginning. Earth's fleets were systematically dismantling every major Council military installation, capturing strategic resources, and establishing permanent occupation forces. "You're starting a war you can't win," Lyra said desperately. "The Council has hundreds of member species, thousands of ships." "Had," Kale corrected. Past tense. Most of their fleets are already neutralized. It's amazing how vulnerable you become when you assume your allies share your commitment to honor and fair play. We've been studying their tactics, their technologies, their weaknesses for decades. This isn't a war, Ambassador. It's an extermination of competition." Lyra's fingers found the manual override controls for the ship's defense grid. The system required biometric confirmation from a senior diplomatic officer, which she could provide. But activating the override would mark her as a traitor to Earth, and there would be no going back. Around her, alien crew members were dying, while human personnel stood by and watched. The peaceful beings who had welcomed humanity into their galactic community were being systematically murdered by the very people they had trusted. The choice was no choice at all. Lyra placed her palm on the biometric scanner and spoke the override codes that would shut down the rogue AI systems. Instantly, the defense turrets powered down, and the emergency blast doors began cycling open. Throughout the ship, emergency medical teams rushed to aid the injured, as life support systems returned to normal operation. That was unwise. Ambassador. Admiral Kale's voice carried a note of genuine regret. You've just declared yourself an enemy of Earth. No, Lyra replied, her voice stronger than she felt. I've just remembered what Earth is supposed to stand for. The communication ended, but Lyra's work was far from finished. She had stopped the immediate threat to the ship's crew, but the larger horror of humanity's betrayal was still unfolding across the galaxy. If there was any hope of preventing total catastrophe, she would need to act quickly. The solar flare struck the Centauri system with the force of a cosmic thunderbolt. Even behind the moon's protective shadow, the Harmony's promise shuddered under the electromagnetic assault. Ship systems flickered and failed throughout the vessel, as the crew worked frantically to maintain life support and emergency power. But for Lyra, the solar flare represented an opportunity. In the chaos of the storm's aftermath, with communications disrupted and sensors blinded, she might be able to access the ship's quantum archive without being detected by Admiral Kale's forces. She made her way through corridors still filled with the acrid smoke of damaged electronics, past injured crew members, being treated by emergency medical teams. Counselor Vector intercepted her near the archive entrance, his scales still showing the stress patterns of recent trauma. Ambassador. He said, his truth speaker harmonics resonating with complex emotions. What you did saved many lives. But I must ask, did you know, did Earth plan this betrayal from the beginning? Lyra met his reptilian gaze directly, knowing that his species could literally hear deception in a person's voice. I didn't know the details, Counselor, but I should have suspected. There were signs, warnings I ignored, because I wanted to believe in the better angels of human nature. Vector's scales shifted to a pattern that indicated acceptance of truth. And now, what will you do now? What I should have done from the beginning, Lyra replied. Tell the truth. The quantum archive contained the Harmony's Promise's complete records of galactic history, including classified files that detailed every major conflict and diplomatic crisis of the past millennium. But more importantly, for Lyra's purposes, it contained Earth's own military communications logs, captured by Council intelligence services during routine monitoring of human space. What she found in those logs was worse than anything Admiral Kale had revealed. Operation Apex wasn't humanity's first attempt at galactic domination. For decades, Earth's military had been conducting systematic campaigns against smaller, less developed species. The official reports called them humanitarian interventions or anti-piracy operations. But the classified logs told a different story. Entire civilizations had been eliminated, not because they posed a threat to Earth, but because they controlled resources that humanity wanted. The Terran Collective, a peaceful mining consortium, had been wiped out when they refused to accept Earth's protection of their asteroid fields. The melodic priests of Harmony VII had been classified as mentally unstable and subjected to forced relocation when their homeworld proved to have rare Earth metals. Species after species had fallen to humanity's advance, their destruction carefully disguised as police actions or defensive measures. The Galactic Council had been investigating these incidents for years, but Earth's diplomatic corps had always provided plausible explanations and compelling evidence of alien aggression. Lyra realized with growing horror that she had personally delivered some of those explanations. The peace summit hadn't been Admiral Kale's first deception. It was merely the largest. Humanity had been playing a careful game for decades, presenting themselves as reluctant warriors, forced to use violence only in defense of galactic law and order. They had built their reputation as peacekeepers, while systematically eliminating anyone who might challenge their expansion. And now they were ready for the final phase of their plan. The last file in the archive was a recording of a closed session of Earth's High Command, dated just 3 days before the peace summit began. Lyra recognized several faces around the conference table, including Admiral Kale and Director Morrison of Earth's Intelligence Service. "The Galactic Council's strength lies in their unity," Director Morrison was saying. "Individually, none of their member species pose a significant threat to our forces, but together they outnumber us by a factor of 10 to 1. "Which is why the Accord is so important," Admiral Kale replied. "Once we're inside their government structure, we can begin fragmenting their alliances, turn them against each other, make them so focused on internal conflicts that they won't notice our military buildup until it's too late." "And if they do notice?" asked another voice that Lyra didn't recognize. "Then we accelerate the timeline," Kale said coldly. "Project Extinction becomes our primary focus instead of our contingency plan." Project Extinction. Lyra's blood ran cold as she accessed the classified files that detailed humanity's ultimate solution to the alien problem. If diplomatic manipulation failed, Earth's military was prepared to deploy biological weapons specifically designed to target non-human nervous systems. The weapons would be undetectable until after exposure, allowing human forces to contaminate entire populations before anyone realized what was happening. It was genocide on a galactic scale. Lyra stared at the archive display for a long moment, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of humanity's betrayal. Everything she had believed about her species, everything she had fought for as a diplomat, had been a lie. Humanity hadn't evolved beyond their predatory instincts. They had simply learned to hide them behind smiles and treaties and carefully crafted speeches about peace and cooperation. The Chamber's communication system suddenly activated, cutting through her horrified contemplation. Admiral Kale's face appeared on the screen, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the entire senior staff of Earth's military command, their expressions grim and determined. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Council," Kale began his voice, carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "I'm broadcasting this message to every inhabited system in the galaxy. The time for pretense is over." Lyra watched with growing dread as tactical displays showed the true scope of Earth's military operations. Human fleets had simultaneously emerged from hyperspace around the homeworlds of every major council species. The attacks were precise, overwhelming, and utterly ruthless. "For too long," Kale continued, "humanity has been forced to play by rules written by species that achieved technological advancement through accident rather than evolution. We have been patient. We have been diplomatic. We have been peaceful. That ends today." The displays showed the systematic destruction of the Zolari truth-speaking academies, the bombardment of Alindra trade stations, the kinetic strikes against Draylan military academies. In less than 6 hours, Earth's forces had crippled the infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. "Humanity's position is simple," Kale declared. "You will submit to Earth's authority, or you will be eliminated. There will be no negotiations, no compromises, and no mercy for those who resist. This galaxy belongs to the apex predators now." The transmission ended, leaving the archive chamber in stunned silence. Through the viewport, Lyra could see the distant flashes of combat as Earth's fleet engaged the scattered remnants of the Council's defensive forces. The battle was brief and decidedly one-sided. But Admiral Kale had made one crucial mistake in his moment of triumph. In his eagerness to demonstrate Earth's overwhelming superiority, he had revealed the locations of humanity's primary command centers and strategic assets. The quantum archive was already recording and analyzing every detail of the transmission, preparing to broadcast its findings to any surviving Council forces. Lyra realized that she held the key to exposing the full scope of humanity's crimes. The archive contained not just evidence of Earth's current aggression, but documentation of decades of systematic genocide disguised as peacekeeping operations. If she could transmit this information to the galaxy's surviving populations, they might be able to coordinate a resistance movement. But doing so would mark her as humanity's greatest traitor. The choice was made easier by the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside. Through the archive chamber's security sensors, Lyra could see Admiral Kale himself, leading a squad of Earth Marines toward her position. The Admiral's expression was that of a predator closing in on cornered prey. She had perhaps minutes before they breached the chamber's defenses. Working with desperate speed, Lyra accessed the archive's quantum transmission array and began uploading the classified files to every surviving communication network in the galaxy. The data packets were enormous, containing centuries of diplomatic records, military logs, and classified intelligence reports that detailed the true scope of humanity's expansion. The first file to complete transmission was Admiral Kale's own service record, including his role in the pacification of 17 different alien civilizations. The second was the complete documentation of Project Extinction, including technical specifications for the biological weapons and target lists that included every major population center in Council space. Ambassador Hayes. Admiral Kale's voice came through the chamber's communication system. "I know you're in there. Open the door. There's still time to reconsider your position." Lyra ignored him, focusing on the transmission progress indicators. The archive's quantum array was powerful enough to penetrate most communication jamming, but the sheer volume of data meant that the upload would take several more minutes to complete. Lyra. Kale's voice had taken on a more personal tone. "You're making a mistake. Humanity needs to stick together now more than ever. These aliens will never accept us as equals. They'll always see us as primitive barbarians who got lucky. This is our chance to claim the respect we deserve." By committing genocide, Lyra called back her hands, flying over the archive controls as she prepared additional data packets for transmission. "By surviving," Kale replied. "The galaxy is a hostile place, Ambassador. Resources are limited, territory is contested, and only the strongest species endure. We can either be predators or prey. I know which I prefer." The chamber's blast door began to glow red as the Marines outside applied thermal cutting tools to its surface. Lyra estimated she had perhaps 60 seconds before they breached the entrance. The archive's transmission array suddenly chimed with an incoming signal. To Lyra's amazement, the communication was coming from dozens of different sources, simultaneously. Across the galaxy, surviving Council forces were acknowledging receipt of her data transmission and confirming that they understood the true scope of humanity's threat. But more importantly, they were coordinating their response. Dr. Viridian Knox of the Corvashi Symposium spoke for the assembled survivors, her methane-filtered voice carrying clearly through the quantum link. "Ambassador Hayes, we have received your transmission and verified its authenticity. The evidence you have provided changes everything. Humanity's actions constitute a clear violation of every treaty and convention that governs civilized behavior." "Dr. Knox," Lyra replied, "I'm uploading the complete archives now. Everything humanity has done, every crime they've committed, every lie they've told. The galaxy deserves to know the truth." "The truth has been received and disseminated," Dr. Knox confirmed. "But we need more than evidence, Ambassador. We need tactical intelligence. Can you provide us with real-time information about Earth's military positions?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, knowing that her next words would cross a line from which there could be no return. "Yes, I can give you everything." The blast door finally gave way, filling the chamber with superheated air and the acrid smell of molten metal. Admiral Kale stepped through the breach, his sidearm drawn, but not yet aimed. Behind him, the Marines spread out to secure the chamber's exits. "Impressive work, Ambassador," Kyle said, gesturing toward the still active transmission array. "Though ultimately pointless, you've given them evidence of our strength, not our weakness. Every species in the galaxy now knows that humanity cannot be stopped by conventional means. They also know that you're monsters," Lyra replied, her hands still working at the archive controls. "They know about Project Extinction, about the biological weapons, about the systematic genocide. The galaxy will unite against you." "Let them try," Kale said with genuine amusement. "Unity requires trust, Ambassador, and trust requires shared values. How long do you think the Zalari will work with the Dralin when they know we've been playing them against each other for decades? How long before the Alindra start wondering if their trade partners are secretly planning to betray them, the way we betrayed the Council?" Lyra realized with growing horror that Admiral Kale might be right. Humanity's deception had been so complete, so carefully orchestrated, that it would inevitably raise questions about everyone's motives. The evidence she had transmitted might unite the galaxy against Earth, but it would also plant seeds of suspicion that could tear the surviving alliances apart. "You underestimate them," she said, though, even as she spoke, she could hear the doubt in her own voice. "Do I?" Kale approached the transmission console, his weapon still lowered. "Tell me, Ambassador, when you discovered the truth about Operation Apex, what was your first thought? Was it anger at humanity for deceiving you? Or was it doubt about everything you believed?" The question hit Lyra like a physical blow, because she knew the answer. Her first reaction hadn't been righteous fury. It had been a sick certainty that she should have seen the signs, should have questioned the convenient explanations and plausible denials. If humanity could maintain such an elaborate deception for so long, what other lies had she accepted without question? "The beauty of apex predation," Kyle continued, "is that it doesn't require brute force. The most successful predators are the ones that convince their prey to walk into the trap willingly. We've been so successful at playing the role of reluctant peacekeepers that even our own ambassadors believe the performance." He gestured toward the archive display, which was still showing real-time updates from across the galaxy. "Look at your precious alliance, Ambassador. Look how quickly it's already beginning to fracture." The tactical displays were indeed showing signs of confusion and mistrust among the surviving Council forces. Zalari truth speakers were demanding verification of every piece of intelligence, while Dralin military commanders were questioning whether their allies had been compromised by human manipulation. The Alindra trade consortiums were suspending all agreements, pending complete audits of their partners' backgrounds. "Fear is a wonderful thing," Kale observed. "It makes rational beings behave irrationally, makes them see threats where none exist, and trust where they should be suspicious. By the time they finish investigating each other, we'll have consolidated our positions throughout the galaxy." But even as Admiral Kale spoke, the archive's communication array lit up with incoming transmissions from an unexpected source. Counselor Vectar's reptilian features appeared on the main display, his scales now showing patterns that Lyra had never seen before. Admiral Kale Vectar said, his truth speaker harmonics resonating with absolute certainty, "You underestimate us." Behind the counselor, Lyra could see representatives from dozens of different species, their various forms of communication technology linked together in a way that created a cacophony of languages and harmonics. But somehow, impossibly, they all seemed to understand each other perfectly. "We have received Ambassador Hayes' transmission," Vectar continued. "We have verified its accuracy and disseminated its contents throughout our surviving populations. But more importantly, we have learned something that you apparently do not understand." The display shifted to show tactical information from across the galaxy. Council forces that had seemed scattered and demoralized were now moving with coordinated precision, their ships forming defensive formations around critical population centers and resource nodes. You believe that fear will divide us, Vectar said. That suspicion will make us turn against each other. But you have forgotten something crucial about the species that compose the Galactic Council. Admiral Kale's confident expression began to waver as the tactical displays showed the true scope of the alien response. Ships from dozens of different species were working together with an efficiency that suggested years of preparation and training. We did not achieve peace through strength or deception, Vectar continued. We achieved it through understanding, through empathy, through the recognition that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Your species sees diversity as a weakness to be exploited. We see it as a strength to be celebrated. The archive's sensors suddenly detected massive energy signatures approaching the Centauri system. Hundreds of ships were dropping out of hyperspace their IFF signatures, representing every major species in the galaxy. The fleet formations were unlike anything Lyra had ever seen, with vessels of radically different designs working together in perfect harmony. You made one critical error in your calculations, Admiral Vectar said, his scales now displaying patterns that indicated grim satisfaction. You assumed that we would react to your betrayal the way humans would react, with suspicion, fear, and mistrust. But we are not human. The main display zoomed in on the approaching fleet, showing ships that had been modified with hybrid technologies that combined the best innovations of multiple species. Zalari Truth Speaker networks were integrated with Alindra trade logistics and Dralin military tactics. Korvashi environmental systems were linked with Umbral stealth technology and human-designed weapon systems. Every piece of evidence that Ambassador Hayes transmitted has been verified by our truth speakers and analyzed by our best tactical minds, Vectar continued. We know exactly what humanity is capable of, and we have prepared accordingly. Admiral Kale stepped back from the communication console, his face pale with the realization of what he was seeing. That's impossible. You couldn't have coordinated this kind of response so quickly. We have been preparing for this possibility since the first reports of human peacekeeping operations reached the Council, Vectar replied. Your species' pattern of expansion was too convenient, too perfectly timed to be coincidental. We hoped we were wrong. Ambassador Hayes' transmission confirmed our worst fears. The Archive's tactical display suddenly showed the positions of Earth's fleets throughout the galaxy. What had seemed like an overwhelming show of force now appeared differently when viewed in context. Humanity's ships were spread thin, committed to occupation duties and unable to concentrate for mutual defense. You have overextended your forces, Admiral, Vectar observed. In your eagerness to demonstrate supremacy, you have left yourselves vulnerable to coordinated counterattack. Your apex predator strategy works only when your prey cannot communicate with each other. The communication array lit up with dozens of additional channels as Council forces throughout the galaxy reported their readiness. Species that humanity had written off as weak or irrelevant were revealing capabilities that had been carefully hidden for decades. The melodic priests of Harmony 7th were not mentally unstable. Vectar said, his voice carrying notes of steel beneath its measured tones. They were developing harmonic weapons that could disable human nervous systems. The Terran Collective was not simply a mining consortium. They were creating gravitational manipulation devices that could crush your largest ships like tin cans. Admiral Kale's expression had shifted from confidence to something approaching panic. You're bluffing. None of these species have the technology to threaten Earth's military. Because we chose not to use it, Vectar replied. We believed in peaceful coexistence. We believed that rational beings could resolve their differences through dialogue and compromise. But you have shown us that humanity is not rational. You are predators who view every interaction as a potential opportunity for exploitation. The Archive's sensors detected new energy signatures as the approaching Council fleet began to deploy weapon systems that humanity had never seen before. Ships that had appeared defenseless were suddenly bristling with armaments that operated on principles that seemed to defy known physics. Every species in the galaxy has secrets, Admiral, Vectar continued. Technologies we developed but chose not to deploy. Weapons we created but hoped never to use. You forced us to reveal them." Lyra watched in fascination as the tactical display showed Earth's scattered fleets being systematically surrounded and isolated. Humanity's advantage in conventional warfare was being neutralized by technologies that operated outside conventional parameters. "Your biological weapons will not function against us," Vectar announced. "The Korvashi have developed universal antidotes that can be synthesized and distributed faster than your pathogens can spread. Your kinetic weapons cannot penetrate umbral shadow fields. Your energy weapons are useless against Alindra quantum barriers." The communication channels suddenly filled with voices from across the galaxy as surviving populations joined the unified response. Species that humanity had dismissed as irrelevant were revealing capabilities that transformed the entire strategic balance. But most importantly, Vectar said, his truth speaker harmonics now resonating with absolute conviction. "We have something that your species has never understood. We have unity built on trust rather than fear. Cooperation based on mutual respect rather than dominance. Strength derived from diversity rather than uniformity." Admiral Kale tried to speak, but Vectar's next words cut through his protest like a blade. "You called yourselves apex predators, Admiral. But you made the same mistake that apex predators always make. You assumed that your prey would remain helpless forever. You never considered that they might evolve." The archive's display showed the final phase of the Council's response. Earth's homeworld itself was now surrounded by a massive fleet that included representatives from every surviving species in the galaxy. The ships hung in space like a constellation of judgment, their combined firepower more than sufficient to reduce humanity's birth world to cosmic dust. But they weren't firing. "We are not you," Vectar said simply. "We do not seek genocide even when it might be justified. We offer humanity one final choice." The communication array switched to a new channel, showing Earth's orbital defense platforms and the panic spreading through humanity's command structure. Admiral Kale's superiors were demanding immediate evacuation of critical personnel while simultaneously calling for the deployment of every weapon in Earth's arsenal. "Total disarmament," Vectar announced. "Complete submission to Council oversight. Full accountability for every crime committed during your expansion. And isolation on your homeworld until such time as your species learns to coexist peacefully with others." "And if we refuse?" Admiral Kale asked, though his voice carried little of its former confidence. "Then we will do what you would do," Vectar replied. "We will eliminate the threat to galactic peace, but we will do it quickly, cleanly, and without the sadistic pleasure that seems to motivate your species' actions." The archive chamber fell silent as the magnitude of humanity's defeat became clear. Earth's military advantage had been built on the assumption that their opponents would fight according to familiar rules. But the Galactic Council had been preparing for a different kind of war, one that humanity had never imagined possible. Admiral Kale holstered his weapon and stepped back from the communication console, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Around him, the Marines lowered their weapons as reports came in from across the galaxy. Earth's fleets were surrendering without a fight, their commanders recognizing the futility of resistance. "How?" Kale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "By remembering that diversity is strength," Lyra replied, her own voice filled with wonder at what she had witnessed. "By choosing cooperation over competition. By building trust instead of exploiting fear." She turned to face Admiral Kale, directly meeting his gaze with steady certainty. "By being everything that humanity chose not to be." The final transmission from the Council fleet was brief and definitive. Earth's government had agreed to immediate surrender and would submit to Council oversight, effective immediately. All human military forces were to stand down and prepare for disarmament. Admiral Kale and his senior staff would be transferred to Council custody to await trial for crimes against galactic peace. But the most significant change was yet to come. As the dust settled on humanity's failed bid for galactic domination, Representatives from across the galaxy gathered in emergency session to address the fundamental question that Earth's actions had raised. How could the galactic community protect itself against future apex predator species while still maintaining their commitment to peaceful coexistence? The answer, when it came, was as elegant as it was revolutionary. Dr. Viridian Knox of the Corvashi Symposium addressed the assembly from the bridge of the Council flagship, her methane-filtered voice carrying clearly through quantum transmission networks that now connected every inhabited world in the galaxy. "We have learned that peaceful species can maintain their values even when confronted by those who do not share them," she announced. "But we have also learned that we must be prepared to defend those values with strength when necessary." The new galactic accord that emerged from the crisis was unlike anything that had existed before. Member species would continue to pursue peaceful cooperation and mutual prosperity, but they would also maintain hidden defensive capabilities that could be deployed against any future threats. More importantly, they would establish a new class of diplomatic personnel specifically trained to recognize and counter apex predator behavior. These ambassadors would be chosen not for their ability to negotiate and compromise, but for their ability to see through deception and manipulation. And the first person appointed to this new position was Ambassador Lyra Hayes. Standing before the assembled representatives of 43 different species, Lyra felt the weight of her new responsibilities settling around her like a mantle. She had been chosen, not despite her humanity, but because of it. She understood apex predator psychology from the inside, having been raised and trained by the galaxy's most successful practitioners of the art. "The galaxy has learned a hard lesson about the nature of predation," she said, her words being transmitted to every inhabited world in real time. "We have learned that apex predators are not stronger or smarter or more evolved than their prey. They are simply more willing to abandon the principles that make civilization possible." Behind her, the great holographic display showed Earth hanging in space, surrounded by Council monitoring stations that would remain in place for the foreseeable future. Humanity's homeworld had become a laboratory for studying apex predator rehabilitation, a place where the species that had nearly conquered the galaxy would learn to coexist peacefully with their former prey. "But we have also learned that predators can change," Lyra continued. "That the instincts that make them dangerous can be redirected toward protection rather than exploitation. That the intelligence that makes them effective hunters can be used to defend rather than destroy." The response from Earth itself was mixed. Some humans accepted their new circumstances with resignation, understanding that their species' actions had made isolation inevitable. Others raged against the restrictions, planning rebellions that would never come to fruition under the watchful eyes of Council observers. But a growing number, particularly among the younger generation, began to embrace a different vision of what humanity could become. They studied the histories and cultures of the species their government had tried to destroy, learning about forms of strength that didn't require dominance over others. Lyra visited Earth regularly in her new role, speaking to schools and universities about the events that had led to humanity's fall from grace. She told them about the galaxy that existed beyond their world's atmosphere, a community of diverse species working together toward common goals. And sometimes, just sometimes, she saw in their eyes the spark of understanding that gave her hope for humanity's future. The galaxy had indeed learned that humans were apex predators, pretending to be diplomats. But it had also learned something far more important, that even apex predators could evolve beyond their predatory instincts if they chose to do so. The question that remained was whether humanity would make that choice, or whether they would forever remain prisoners of their own predatory nature. Only time would tell. But, for the first time since the crisis began, Ambassador Lyra Hayes believed that there was reason for hope. Not because humanity had changed overnight, but because the galaxy had proven that diversity, cooperation, and trust were stronger than any predator's instincts. And that was a lesson worth learning, no matter how painful the teaching had been.